So imagine making a video on itemization just for Riot to decide it's a great idea to remove and rehaul half of the items you used a week later, while also removing a core rune for your champion. And how have you been, guys? Anyways, the main change in this split is that Riot finally reverted the crit chance. All fun and games until you realize they also removed lethal tempo and ruined most on-hit items, making all the attack speed reliant champions useless. Well, all except for the funny I ignore the rules and don't care about the attack speed cap champion that ironically relies on crit. Anyways, let's get to the runes and items. I've procrastinated enough. First thing you have to know is that there are only two options: Press the Attack and Hail of Blades. Each one has different build path, so I'll go over them separately. Also, some people might try to gaslight you that Conqueror or First Strike are good on her, but don't let them into your brain, they have no idea what they are talking about. Conqueror takes way too long to stack, and you have too low of a range to utilize the First Strike, so don't even bother. Now for the actually useful runes. Press the Attack is basically the new lethal tempo. The only issue with it though is that it takes 3 entire hits before it procs, and while it's not as relevant in the early game, with the current meta, you won't even last 30 seconds playing this game. I mean against the funny crit champs in game, of course. So before you decide to go with it, just remember that I warned you. Anyways, for the on-hit, these are the options. When it comes to Absorb Life versus Triumph, it all depends on the lane. If you think you will struggle against poke, it's better to take Absorb Life, so you can survive the lane more easily. But if you think you're fine, then go Triumph, it gives a lot more value in the long run. Next one is Alacrity versus Bloodline. This choice is very similar. Bloodline allows you to sustain more in annoying lanes, while Alacrity makes you stronger in all-in situations. Most of the time you want to take Alacrity, just because you will be buying lifesteal most games anyways. Now for the last part of the precision tree, you can go either Last Stand or Cut Down. First one gives you a lot more value compared to Coup de Grace, and you actually utilize it a lot better, especially when you get fed. It's simple math. Coup de Grace limits you how much more damage you can deal, while Last Stand allows you to be a lot more greedy, giving you a lot more value in the long run. And while Cut Down also limits how much damage you can deal, it works better with items like BORK, and it also speeds up getting enemy into a kill range. It's also good if you are not planning to buy defensive items. Now, for the secondary rune page, there are 3 options, first one being Domination. You want to go either Taste of Blood or Sudden Impact. Taste of Blood helps you survive the lane a bit better, and Sudden Impact is basically for a more aggressive approach. Pretty simple. And for the Treasure and Ultimate Hunter is usually a lot better. It allows you to be more aggressive with your ULT, and helps you save your support a lot more often. Treasure Hunter on the other hand is a lot more greedy, but it helps you snowball faster. Though after most recent nerfs, I don't see a world where 450 gold is actually worth more than shitloads of cooldowns. But if instead you prefer to play more for scaling, your other option is Resolve. Conditioning and Overgrowth is a go-to combination, because it helps you scale your defensiveness, but you can also choose Boneplating when the lane has a strong all-in champions like Lucian or Kai'Sa, and Second Wind if they have long-range poke. You can also choose Revitalize if you are planning to go for more lifesteal in runes and items, and if you have healing support. Now for the Unflinching, the only time I would choose it is if the enemy had more CC than brain cells, and there is no avoiding it. But you want to stay away from this rune as much as you can, it's useless. And the last one, Inspiration. You always want to take cash back, no matter what. It helps a lot with snowballing, and gives you around 200 additional gold per item. Most of the time you want to combine it with Cosmic Insight. While the item cooldown is rather useless, lower cooldown on summoner spells is insanely broken, and allows you to play aggressive more often than your enemies. But if you want to be aggressive from the start, but enemy has a lot of poke, your other option is Biscuits. What can I say, more health, and random mana always good. It can help you bait. And speaking of bait, I know some of you will ask about Jack of all trades. Nope. It's shit. Don't take it. You will never get full value out of it, unless you go some crazy mentally ill build that doesn't make sense, and all of that just for 15 AD. Nope, I'm not gonna deal with this shit. Yeah, that's pretty much all you need to know about the runes for on-hit build. Now onto the funny one-shot build. When it comes to Hail of Blades, there honestly isn't much to talk about. Just go these. and that's all. And for the secondary runes, 99% of the time you will be going for this, just because you get to snowball a lot faster, and in 1% this, if the enemy has annoying long-range poke in late game. And since I've already explained it all, I'll just move on to the items. And just to let you know, they are more or less in order, but it doesn't mean you have to follow it. You can adjust the builds to what you think is the best in the situation. First item will be good old classic, Blade of the Ruined King. With the % damage nerf, I regret to say, but it's still the best start item on her. It truly shows the current state of the on-hit champions. But at least they buff the stats, and the lifesteal is always good. Second most consistent option is Guinsoo. Attack speed good, more attack speed also good, but it just has a shit build path. Not much else to add except for Riot, please make this fucking item stronger. Nobody wants it to be stackable item, just revert it for fuck's sake. Now for the Hurricane, just like with Guinsoo, it's even stronger now just because of the PTA changes. You basically deal a lot more damage to the entire enemy team with that bonus. It's worth buying a second or fourth item if the enemy team doesn't have too much range. Your next option instead of Hurricane is Terminus. While I still think it's a bullshit that you have to stack it up, it can still be okay item, but only if enemy has a lot of frontline and you'll be able to survive long enough to stack it up. Otherwise just skip it. Our next option, that nobody would expect of me after my very first item video, is pure garbage. I mean wit's end. Ever since they gave this item tenacity, it's a lot more worth considering than ever before. You mostly want to buy it when the enemy has a lot of magic damage and CC. And yes, you can even buy it first item in some cases, but it's mostly when you go up against mage ADC like Ziggs or Wei. And if you play against something more normal, but enemy still has a lot of CC, you can consider buying it later on. At least it's still better than Kraken. Speaking of, this item is absolutely dog shit. That's it, Kraken is my new wit's end. I will hate on this item until they completely rework it. And if you play Kalista and think this item is good on her, please stop playing Kalista, or start reading. So Kalista's E, her core fucking damage, basically executes enemies. So you want to deal with the first part of HP the most. And Kraken also has execute damage. So those two don't go together, because enemies will die before you actually utilize Kraken's potential. So please don't buy this useless bait item. And while I'm on the topic of bait items, Zephry. Zephry is basically a waste of money on Kalista. Any other ADC? Yes, it can be good. Kalista? No. You are throwing 2k gold for 10% attack speed, slightly longer jumps, and a mostly useless on-hit passive. You can buy it after you are full build, but unless you need those jumps, you can just swap it out for a different item. Now for the damage items, the first option that you will always want to consider is Bloodthirster. They may have removed overheal from runes, but bringing back the shield to this item is a much better option. The damage it was previously giving, well, let's just say you wouldn't be able to utilize it much, and the shield will always be useful. You want to buy it third most of the games, unless you really need that lifesteal early on, then you can go for it as second, or in some very rare scenarios, even first item. It's really good if enemy has a long-range poke, or if you feel like the fights will be very much extended. Though let's be honest, in Season 14 it happens so sporadically that you have a higher chance of seeing boss not inting. Your next must-have item, Lord's Dominic. Of course it doesn't apply if you bought Terminus, but after the changes, I don't know why you would even consider it over that juicy 40% armor pen. Like for real, 30% armor pen, with 18 armor and magic resists, and you have to attack 6 times in total before you even get those stats maxed out. So yeah, Lord's Dominic is a tiny bit better than Terminus IRL in-game. You get it as a third item, or later, depending on how much you need it, but you want it pretty much in every game, unless they have 0 tanks. But even then it's a valid item. The only thing you have to know is that you shouldn't hesitate to buy a Mortal Reminder instead, if the enemy has a lot of healing. It's only a 5% armor pen difference, and you don't have to rely on your teammates actually getting heal cut. Another more offensive option is Collector. If you think your lane will force you to poke more than all in, you can go for Q-Max and Perma Poke with some of that lethality. Or if you think you will be very aggressive and you will get insanely fed. Both work, just remember it's not as good of an item in this build, unless the enemy has barely any tanks, just because it takes up an item slot, and you buy that only for a quicker snowball. Similar option to Collector is Edge of Night. The major difference is that you buy it more for defense, rather than snowball. Most of the time you want to consider it as a late game item when a single mistake can lose you the game. Most tank item options that I'm going to talk about in a second are better, but if you suck and can't position yourself, or if the enemy has some bullshit, it's also a good option. Another semi-defensive option is Maw of Malmortius. It's a simple item and I don't have to talk much about it. If you need magic res and damage, it's a good option. If not, just ignore it. And that's pretty much all of your damage options. And I know what you're gonna say. What about these two? Well, no, they are dog shit useless. Shieldbow lost the life steal, rest of the stats are shit, and the shield it gives is lower than my laptop storage. You are better off buying either Maw or Steraks for that. And when it comes to the QSS, the only time it was valid was back when it actually worked against Mordekaiser's funny dungeon. And for all the other CC, you can buy Wit's End, Steraks, Edge of Night, and you can also go cleanse. It's simply not worth it. And now for the fun part, Riot's beloved tank and bruiser items that will help you finish off your build. Your go-to tank item is Jak'sho. It gives you all the defensive stats, making it the most broken tank item against mixed comps. Depending on how much you need it, you can buy it as third or fourth item. However, if enemies have more AD damage, or their AP is useless, your other option is randuins. And now that the crit items were buffed, it's even better and more consistent item to buy. And for the magic res, you have few options, but your main one is rookern. Tons of HP, tons of MR, and a big shield. What else would you need? Apart from that, there are two other options, but those are a bit more situational. First one is Abyssal Mask. It isn't as good as rookern, but if you need only some MR, and your team has a lot of magic damage, it's honestly worth considering, especially if you aren't the one carrying the game. And your other option is Force of Nature. It's not as good as it used to be, but it can still bring some value. If enemy team decided to be a little bit goofy and drafted a heavy AP team, you can buy it as a second item with MR. Otherwise, it's not worth it. Now that you have a lot of HP, time for the funniest item in the game, Steraks. Nothing better than getting funny stats just from existing, and a 1k shield on top of that. And let's not forget the tenacity, that is the most broken stat on KALISTA. Your other option for last item is Overlord's bloodmail, but it's only when you don't need much more survivability. But honestly, you can even sell boots for it. The stats it gives are insane. And this very item only shows how tanks are Riot's favorite kid. Now, there are three other tanky options, but they are either useless or very situational. First one is Titanic. Okay, this one is plain useless. The stats are mid, the damage from on hit is low, and you can't even reset your attack with it. It's not worth at all. Next one, Spirit Visage. 99% of the time it's a bad choice. The only time you would consider buying it is when you have a lot of healing in your team, and you also went BT. And the last option is Shojin. For those who've watched my previous item video, know about the very funny interaction, but I'll mention it here again. So if you buy Terminus and Shojin, you will start stacking Shojin with just the attacks. So yes, it can be a valid item, but only when you buy Terminus early on, and if enemy doesn't have high range like Twitch or Caitlyn. Now that's all for the on-hit options, and just so you don't get too confused, here are a few full build examples. And for the next part, don't worry, the itemization for the one-shot build is simpler than a Garen combo. And if you are still unsure after the video, feel free to join my Discord and shoot any questions. Linky in the description. First item that you want to rush 100% of the game is Collector. And yes, even after recent nerfs it's still broken as fuck. Lethality, crit, high damage, and funny spears. These were the ingredients chosen to create a perfect build. But Riot Games accidentally added an extra ingredient to it. Team Diff. Thus the mute button was born. Anyways, what was I saying? Ah yes, it gets even funnier after your second item. Infinity Edge gives you so much value it's insane. And yes, it's also still good after the nerfs. That's all. Now, hear me out. I know I've hated on Lethality build in the past, and honestly, I still do, but I always enjoyed Lethality combined with crit, and that difference makes the world. KALISTA has basically one ability that she can rely on without attacks. And no, I'm not counting the QE combo, so you still have to attack the enemy to utilize your E. Now why would you go full Lethality when you can go literally one or two more crit items? One of which is literally a superior version of its Lethality counterpart and allows you to deal way more damage, just because you have to use auto attacks anyways. Yeah, that's what I thought. Speaking of LDR, most of the time you want to buy it as third item. It's just broken, and most of the times you will go against multiple tanks. But if the draft allows it, you can actually skip LDR, or buy it way later in the build, just because of the crit changes. 50% crit is enough to one-shot almost anyone. Anyways, if you do decide to skip it, your next best bet is Edge of Night. Good stats, combined with a funny shield, allow you to snowball a lot more safely. It's especially good if your positioning is a little bit goofy sometimes. But if you are as cocky as me, you can also go for opportunity. It can help you one-shot a lot easier, and it also allows you to run away from the incident. And I know it's a very funny item, but if you want to be more consistent instead, your other option is Bloodthirster. You usually want it as 4th or 5th in your build. And it's simple, same concept as with the on-hit build. Now, for the last item, you have an option between Rapid Fire Cannon and Hurricane. Some attack speed is always good, especially on KALISTA, a champion reliant on the stat, regardless of the build. You should go for RFC if the enemy has a lot of high-range champions, or if you think it's hard to get close to them. Hurricane, on the other hand, is the exact opposite. If they have lots of low range, you will basically nuke their entire team in half a second. Highly recommend. Lots of fun. But if you think you don't need the attack speed as much, and need some more defense, your only option is Mauve Malmortius. Just buy it if you are really desperate for that shield, and Bloodthirster isn't enough. And I know for a fact that since it's a crit build, people will ask me about this thing right here. The answer is no. You nuke already, making the after damage insignificant. Now, if I didn't mention some items, it means there was no point in doing so. But if you think I missed something, comment down below. Also like and subscribe, and join my Discord. Thanks, bye.